Hi everybody and welcome back to Apple Cottage. This is Sandy Aberley and I am Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming. Trying to live a self-sustaining life here in Wyoming. And with Gardening Together we talk about different gardening aspects. On Tuesday I said I would do a talk on herbal teas because I love herbal teas. And so I thought I would first start out, before I do individual plants, I would talk about some of the teas that I make myself. Now this is my morning tea. Every single morning, like clockwork, I drink this tea. It's wonderful for women. It has so many different herbs in it. It has peppermint, raspberry, bee balm, blackberry, all the leaves from that. Stevia leaves, which I grow. It has cinnamon sticks. I always add licorice root. Now I don't grow licorice root, but in Chinese medicine, licorice root enhances it, pulls all those great things in the different herbs out. And so I always add that to my teas. It has rose petals, which I grow. Hibiscus flowers. And I have grown hibiscus before, but I just don't happen to have any growing right now. In fact, I should plant some hibiscus this summer because I love those flowers. They're so big and beautiful. And of course it has cinnamon sticks in there because I love that little added cinnamon in there. And I just take a couple pinches of it, put it in my tea strainer, and I steep it for 10 minutes. And after it's steeped, I add a little honey because in every cup of tea I have, I add honey because I just love it. This is just one that's, in case you just are feeling a little run down, a little achy, sick, that's what this one is. In my cupboard, I have an arthritis one. I don't have arthritis, but sometimes people want one, and so I have that. And this is a tea I take at night. Not every night. Well, sometimes I'll go through stretches and I'll take it every night, drink it every night. And it's just kind of a brain tea. It has things that help rejuvenate your brain. And my feeling is that if you're sleeping, it's the perfect time for your brain to rejuvenate itself, to heal itself. And so that's just my thinking. And I think it works. No, of course it works. So, we are going to talk about things that grow in the wild, but you can grow them in your garden too. And sometimes the varieties are a little bit different, and sometimes they're exactly the same. So the first thing I'm going to start out with is a tea that you can make that's really tastes very much like a green tea, only with a little bit of sweet notes, I guess I would say. A little sweetness, where green tea doesn't really have a sweet taste to it. And this is a plant that you would just consider a weed. It's fireweed. It grows very tall. It has the flowers on top of the stalk, anywhere from pinkish to purple. I love it. In fact, I've dug it up and planted it in my yard. Dug it up from the wild and brought it in. Just because I think it's a beautiful plant, the bees love it, and it makes a great tea. And so what you do, when you're foraging at all for any herbs, you should wear gloves, of course. You should have a good sharp pruner, some wipes so that in between the different plants you can wipe that off in case there's any kind of disease or bacteria so you're not spreading it. And some good shoes. Now if you're growing them in your garden and you want to, it's the middle of summer and you want to pick some and you want to wear your flip-flops, that's totally okay. But if you are out in the wild, I would suggest that you wear some heavy-duty shoes. Now, when you're going to cut fireweed, because it grows in meadows, it grows in ditches, make sure it's not any place that they may have sprayed chemicals. So sometimes along the roadways, on dirt roads, it might be grown in the ditches, but they might have sprayed, so don't pick it from there. Look around and see a better place that's off the road to pick it. So you're going to cut it at the base, and all you have to do is take that stalk and just strip those leaves, and then you take them home and dry them. And it will make really a lovely tea. If I like to mix teas together, so I might add mint or stinging nettles or chamomile to it, just so it gives it a more complex flavor. But those are just choices. You don't have to at all. I like to pick the leaves before it blooms, so you want to be doing that early springtime. But it's very fresh, and you can drink it cold or hot, and I steep it probably 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and you'll have a wonderful cup of tea. So the next plant I want to talk to you about is one of my favorites. It's the base to this tea concoction that I did, and that's raspberries. Now, a lot of us grow raspberries, and you can actually forage for raspberries out in the wild, in meadows, in wooded areas. A lot of times they'll even have raspberry patches. And the leaves may be a little bit different, but it still gives you the same effect. Now, a raspberry tea is it's tangy, kind of fruity, and it's just a wonderful tea. I add honey to it. Some people use other sweeteners to it. You don't have to. It just depends on the mixture, the taste that you want. And another trick about raspberries is the larger you can dry the leaf and the larger pieces you can have when you go to steam it, to steep it, the more flavor it will have. Like this one, the raspberry leaves are very crunched up, but that's because I have so many other things in there, and so when you're mixing it all breaks up. But raspberry leaves, they're high in vitamin C, they have iron, and they have calcium, so that's good. A lot of times when it's a nursing mother and she needs her milk production to increase, she will buy a tea from the store, and it usually has either raspberry leaves or strawberry leaves, because those will induce higher milk production. And so that's just something that raspberries do. Now, you can drink raspberry tea hot, you can drink it cold, or you can make popsicles out of it. And they make a yummy popsicle. And so in the summertime, instead of giving your kids a popsicle that has that you just bought from the store, make some raspberry tea and freeze those in your popsicle molds. And so that's kind of cool. And I just find raspberry just such a great base to so many different teas that I do, that I think it's one of those things that you should try. Now, when do you pick raspberry leaves, and what type of leaf are you looking for? Now, it's better, I believe, to pick them before the raspberries set, before it starts to bloom. The reason is because all that energy is going into the bloom and then into the raspberry, and as soon as it starts to set and it's done setting, that cane starts to die. So I just think that it's better to do it before it even starts to make the berry. And I do it on the second year cane, so it's not a green stalk, it's a very dark stalk, and that's the leaves that you want to take. And so I just gather a whole bunch of young leaves when they start to emerge in the springtime, and I dehydrate them in my dehydrator. Of course, you could use an oven or racks, anything that works for you. But raspberry is one of those great things to do. Now, staying with that same line of thinking, strawberry leaves is our next one. Now, strawberry leaves are tangy, but they're much more fruity than a raspberry leaf. I always like to collect the young leaves that come up anytime during the summertime. It doesn't matter at all. But you will find that if you're foraging and you're getting raspberries in the wild, they're usually an alpine variety that way. They're smaller, but the flavor is so much more intense. It's just fabulous. And they have vitamin E, no, I take that back, vitamin C, vitamin D, it has manganese, calcium, iron, vitamin C. They're just chock full of those, especially those wild alpine varieties. And you can grow alpine strawberries in your yard. And they're always smaller. They're a little more elongated. And they're very tart. But the flavor is just so intense. And that intense flavor is in the leaf too. And so that's kind of fun too. And like a raspberry leaf, when you dry it, the more you keep it in whole pieces before you make it into a tea, the stronger the flavor is. Now both raspberries and strawberries have that toxin that when you first pick it, before it's completely dry, it makes a toxin. And so you have to make sure when you dry them that they're completely dry and crunchy. And as long as you have done that, you're completely safe. It's just that in-between stage that has a little bit of toxin that might give you an upset stomach if you drink a lot of it. Now, I think it tastes very fresh, and you can drink it hot or cold. You steep it for 5 minutes, and it's a great tea. It also does milk production just like a raspberry does. And so that is kind of an interesting fact about those two leaves. Especially if you're a young mother and you just need that little bit of help. But I just think it's a fun, fruity tea that everybody should try. Because we love our strawberries, but most of us have never even thought that, oh, I could make some tea out of those leaves. So let's switch to a completely different kind of plant. One that you would probably think is an awful, horrible plant, but it's not. It is fabulous. The dreaded stinging nettles. And you're going, no, I'm not drinking stinging nettles. Oh my gosh, you really need to rethink that. Now, stinging nettles are chocked full of vitamins and minerals. Iron, calcium, potassium, manganese. It has vitamin A, C, and it's actually the only plant on the planet that actually can boost your vitamin D. The only plant that can do that. And I find that just totally fun. Now, of course, it has stinging nettles. It will sting your fingers. It'll sting anything that touches your arm, your feet. So stinging nettles is something you need to be wearing good shoes, even if you're growing it in your yard, because that stinging nettles could drop on your flip-flops, and for 15 minutes your feet are going to be tingling and poky and prickly. So it's just something to think about. Now the thing is that stinging nettles is it's a great food for you. You harvest the young leaves and you steam them, or you can boil them, and that heat makes those little hairs, they're just gone. It just makes it so they don't sting at all. Because if you just ate a stinging nettle leaf, it would irritate your mouth and irritate your throat, but that hot water makes that completely dissipate. When you steam the leaves as a food, it completely dissipates, and so it's perfectly fine to have. Now, stinging nettles is very good for arthritis. In fact, I once read a story, and it made me seriously laugh out loud. This woman had a grandfather who was very elderly, arthritis, and where they lived, on the hillside, it was completely stinging nettles. So every spring, when the stinging nettles are 6 to 12 inches high, he would strip down and he would roll all the way down the hill. I can't even imagine what that felt like, because I've gotten stinging nettles. I've bumped it, because I grow them in pots because I want them. I don't want them in my yard, but in great big pots, I'm totally okay. And it's touched my skin, is just tingly and tingly. And so I just can't even imagine how he felt after rolling down that hill. But he was really good and didn't have his arthritis for a while after doing that, because those hairs poke into your skin and it must have some kind of toxin that stimulates so that it helps with arthritis. And I found that just a fun story. Now, every year I see this post that pops up on Facebook, somebody's sharing it, and it says, man dies from using stinging nettles as toilet paper. That is a complete lie. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard in my life. Nobody is ever dying by using stinging nettles as toilet paper. You may be crowned the stupidest man on earth, but it is not going to kill you. Those stings only last 10 or 15 minutes. Nobody is going to die from touching stinging nettles. Now, would I use stinging nettles as toilet paper? Never. But every year, Joe will say, hey, that story's circulating again. And I just shake my head. That's just so ridiculous. Now, if you wanted to combine some things with stinging nettles to make a tea, because I like complex flavors, you can combine and make a really good blood tea to enrich your blood. You can use plantain, mint, stinging nettles. And that combination just really goes through your body, and it's just wonderful and healthy. Now, stinging nettles can be very powerful. And some people won't drink it just because it's very strong. But a lot of times people will add lemon juice to it, and that will help with that. You could add strawberry leaves. That would help. Or you could add some honey, and that sweetness would help with that. But stinging nettles is a fabulous plant. I know it's scary and it's pokey and it's, a lot of people don't want to try it. But really, you will be pleasantly surprised. Now, if you have stinging nettles and you're never going to make tea, you might as well make fertilizer with it. So all you have to do, you put your gloves on, you cut it at the base, and you just jam it in a 5-gallon bucket. Fill it with water and let it steep for a couple weeks. 3 weeks, really. And it will smell horrible. But it is some of the best fertilizer on the planet. And so I usually do a 10-to-1 ratio. And so it's 10 parts water to 1 part that juice from after you've basically fermented it. Another thing, when I dry my stinging nettles, I just cut it at the base and just lay it on racks and let it dry. Then I'll strip the leaves. I'm still wearing gloves because it hasn't been heated or steamed or anything. And so it could still give me that tingling sensation. But that's just something to think about. Now, another thing that I just love to grow, and I love to harvest, because there is a wild one, a wild variety that's native to the United States, and that's mint. And I grow spearmint and peppermint, orange mint, chocolate mint, and apple mint. Yes, because it's apple cottage, and so that's why I got it. And it is a lovely plant. I just love rubbing those leaves, and that smell just wafts through the air, and it's just fabulous. In fact, when we go up our driveway, there's a rock wall, and it's, 2.5, 3 feet tall, something like that. And I had planted mint on top around a little pond on part of it. And mint likes to spread. It doesn't know its boundaries. It thinks it can go any place it wants to, especially spearmint. And so now, after so many years, it's literally coming through those stones. And so when you come up the driveway, you will bump into it. You get out of the car and you're just going to bump into it. And that smell wafts in the air. It is just fabulous. I always want a cup of tea when I come inside because of that. But it's just such a lovely smell. But because it doesn't know any boundaries, you may want to grow it in pots. Especially things like spearmint. It wants to spread everywhere. And chocolate mint wants to spread everywhere. Where my peppermint and my orange and my apple mint doesn't really spread that much. And maybe that's just because of our climate and our soils, where my spearmint, it'll grow any place I want it to. It doesn't matter if it's good soil, bad soil, rocky soil, it doesn't care. And I like a lot of it, unless I'm making some jelly, then I'll pinch the flowers off. But the bees, especially the little native bees, just love it. And so that's always a good addition. But I like adding mint to a lot of my teas. If I go out to a restaurant and they give you a selection and you're not sure, mint is always a good one to pick, because you're always safe and it's going to taste good. And I drink it cold, I drink it hot. It's totally up to you how you want to have it. People in the South make mint julep, and it's got fresh mint leaves in there. I like making mint jelly because I like it with lamb. And actually I like it with a lot of different meats too. So it's just really good, and I like it. Now there's so many different herbs and plants that we could talk about, that we could make teas out of, wild and domestic. Now, I once read that they found it completely impossible that anybody that lived in the United States would ever get scurvy and die. Now, scurvy is a lack of vitamin C, and it was a real problem in the early Americas. But it was because it was a lack of knowledge, because spruce evergreens, pine trees, and fir evergreens, they all are such a huge source of vitamin C. And so when I am harvesting them, I like those fresh spring little, I guess I would call them a bud that comes out. You know, you got your spruce tree and the little branches coming out, and then the buds are a lighter color. You can harvest those, and you can use them as a tea right then, or you can just dry them and use them. You can literally pick them in the wintertime too, but I like to do it when they're new and fresh and just let them dry by themselves. I just lay them out and let them dry. Young pine needles, the same thing. It's very nutritious, so much vitamin C. And so that if you're out in the woods, you can easily make yourself a cup of tea by just the trees around you. There's just so many trees that you can make a tea out of, not just the evergreens. You can make them out of, especially when it's springtime, ash, oak. If you have a linden tree, and the flowers will make a wonderful tea. And you don't need very many flowers, like 3 or 4 flowers to a cup of tea, or a cup of water. Wonderful. It's interesting that plants you use, sometimes you're using the leaf, sometimes you're using bark, sometimes you're using the inner bark, the roots, the flowers. So it's just a matter of knowing which part of which plant you can use. And so in the comments below, I'm going to list the 2 books that I just think are fabulous, that if you're out in the wild, how you can make teas from all kinds of stuff. And it would just take me hours and hours to go through them. And so you could just check out those books. A lot of times the libraries will have those 2 books. But you can just make dandelions, you can make tea out of. Horseradish root, you can make tea out of. There's just an abundance. And so many times, things that we call weeds, like burdocks and curly dock, you can make teas out of, which are really good and healthy for you. And so sometimes people are just too quick to judge that plant and just go, it's a weed. I'm going to cut it down, I'm going to spray it, I'm going to burn it, I'm going to do something. Instead of really realizing the potential that that herb or that plant or that so-called weed has. Like out in areas, they have what they call pineapple weed, which is also called false chamomile. It looks like a chamomile, but it's not a chamomile plant. But any tea that you were going to make with chamomile, you could use with that pineapple weed. It's just so interesting. But a couple things, a couple notes to think about when you're foraging for plants. Make sure you're never taking endangered species. like wild ginger has become such an endangered species. Don't harvest that in the wild. Be careful to not pick any leaves where people may have sprayed. A lot of times plants will grow in the ditches by roads, by gravel roads, but a lot of times they've sprayed, and so you don't want to do that. Even be careful in your yard if you or your neighbor have sprayed, because you don't want to ingest those toxins, those chemicals. So just be careful with that kind of thing, because it's not just on surfaces, it gets into the leaf itself and into the stem and the whole plant. So just be careful with that. And just be, don't over harvest. You know, you may fall in love with a certain plant out in the wild, but just be mindful that that plant has to, it uses those leaves or that bark or whatever to sustain itself. So just be careful with that. But I hope you enjoy this. Now, on Friday nights for a while, I did the Women in Our Lives. And I stopped at 5. I just did family members that had really influenced me. And I pulled out an old book that I have literally watched, or not watched, but have read easily 20 or 30 times. I'll show you the book on Friday night when I do it. And Maria Childs is the author. And I had to honestly look at myself and say, a woman that literally lived in that, she was born in 1802. She lived a long time ago, influenced the way I look at things, think about things, and her philosophy was that things were pieces, fragments, and we put those all together to make our lives. And so I'm going to talk about her and her book and why she influenced me so much. And so I am going to do another episode of The Women in Our Lives this Friday. So I hope you tune into that at 6 o'clock on Friday night. So this is Sandy at Apple Cottage. I am Suburban Homesteader, Wyoming. And thanks for joining me today when we're talking about teas, because I just love a cup of tea.